The sky above the battlefield was the color of dried blood, a heavy, clotted red that seemed to sag under the weight of the dying day. Shattered towers of plasteel and ferrocrete pierced the horizon like the broken teeth of some colossal beast, and the ground between them was littered with the detritus of war, crushed exosuits, charred supply drones, the occasional severed cybernetic limb still twitching pitifully in the dust. The air was thick with the burnt metal stench of plasma discharges, spiced with the bittersweet tang of leaking coolant. Kassira moved through the devastation like a phantom. Her steps made no sound. Her armor, a dark, supple weave of living metal, shifted seamlessly with her movements, absorbing the crimson twilight into its folds. Her skin, a smooth canvas of porcelain white, caught the sickly light and reflected it faintly, as if she carried some stubborn memory of cleaner suns. Her long, pointed ears, sensitive as radio antennae, twitched at every distant boom and crackle. She was not in a hurry. There was no need to rush among the dying. The humans called her people the Bloodborne, a name whispered with equal parts fear and fascination. And in their soldiers' barracks, drunk on synthetic whiskey, they told each other wild stories. That the Bloodborne drank the souls of the wounded, that a single drop of their blood could heal mortal wounds or twist you into something monstrous, that they fought not for land or wealth, but out of some ancient, unknowable hunger. Kassira found most of these stories hilarious. If her kind had really been half as terrifying as humans imagine, the war would have been over centuries ago, probably with fewer supply shortages and infinitely better boots. She kicked aside a fallen combat drone, its severed optic cables trailing behind it like the intestines of some mechanical animal, and paused beside a crumpled figure. A human soldier, judging by the crude make of his body armor and the outdated rifle lying uselessly a few feet away. He was face down in the dirt, his uniform torn, blood pooling beneath him in a lazy, reluctant trickle. Kassira tilted her head, studying him. His vitals, scanned automatically by her armor's embedded systems, were faint but stubbornly present. His wounds were bad. Shrapnel lodged deep in his abdomen, bones broken, internal bleeding setting in like a slow, thorough assassin. By all rights, he should have been dead already. "You humans," she murmured aloud, more to herself than to him. "Stubborn as malfunctioning mechs and half as smart." A faint groan escaped the man's lips. Kassira's ears twitched at the sound and she sighed. She could walk away. She should walk away. Interfering would risk everything. Her mission, her anonymity, possibly her life. The council would have her hide strung up in the square if they knew she was wasting resources on a human. And yet, cursing under her breath in her native tongue, a sharp musical sound like broken glass tumbling down a waterfall. She crouched beside him, her fingertip elongated into a fine needle-sharp claw, and she drew a single bead of her own blood. It glowed faintly, pulsing with an internal light, viscous and heavy with power. "This is a terrible idea," she told him, as if he were conscious enough to argue. "You're probably going to grow an extra head, or sprout wings, or start quoting bad poetry. Not my fault." With a deft motion, she touched the blood to his lips. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the man jerked as if an invisible fist had punched him square in the chest. His eyes flew open, vivid green, rimmed with pain and confusion, and he gasped, dragging in a ragged breath. The wounds across his body sealed themselves with unsettling speed, the flesh knitting cleanly, almost too cleanly, as though time itself had simply reversed. He blinked up at her, his gaze glassy and unfocused. "Are you an angel?" Kassira snorted, a sound that did not fit her otherwise ethereal appearance. "If I am, you're in serious trouble." He tried to sit up, groaned, and fell back with a grunt. What? "You're alive. Congratulations." "Don't expect a trophy," she said dryly, glancing around. Distant engines rumbled, drawing closer. They didn't have long. "Name," she demanded. He squinted at her. Jonas. Jonas Carter, Lieutenant." Kassira rolled her eyes. "Fantastic. I rescued an officer. My luck is as rotten as your sense of self-preservation." He gave a weak chuckle, then winced. "I don't suppose You have a medevac stashed somewhere? Maybe a spare shuttle? I have a bad attitude and a healthy fear of bureaucracy, Kassira said, grabbing his arm and hauling him to his feet with alarming strength for her size. We'll have to make do. The engines grew louder. Low flyers by the sound of them. Too heavy for recon drones. Too fast for transports. Probably a sweeper squad, mopping up survivors. You can walk? She asked, watching him critically. Define walk, Jonas muttered. If you mean stagger in the general direction of not dying, sure. I'll take it, Kassira said, slinging his arm over her shoulders and dragging him toward the relative cover of a toppled hover tank. Her armor's adaptive systems flexed against the added weight, but made no complaint. Jonas looked at her sidelong as they half-hobbled, half-lurched across the field. So, not that I'm ungrateful or anything, but what are you? Medic? Field nurse? Mysterious battlefield goddess? Something far worse, Kassira said, her mouth quirking in a humorless smile. I'm a very bad idea you're going to regret immensely. Jonas laughed, a real laugh this time, dry and raw. Story of my life. Behind them, searchlights flared across the battlefield, slicing through the bloody dusk. The first low flyer swept overhead, and Jonas caught a glimpse of its insignia. Human but not friendly. Mercenaries, maybe, or worse. He tightened his grip instinctively. You sure about this? He rasped. Kassira's eyes gleamed as she glanced back at the pursuing lights. Number. But it's better than waiting here for a bullet to argue philosophy with your skull. They slipped into the tangled wreckage just as the first plasma shots scorched the air where they had stood seconds before. Huddled behind the burned-out tank, Jonas pressed a hand to his still-healing side and grimaced. Hey, he whispered, if I turn into a blood-sucking monster later, you'll tell me, right? Kassira gave him a wicked grin that showed just the faintest hint of sharp canines. If you do, you'll be the second most annoying one I know. Then, with a flex of her armor and a muttered curse about babysitting half-baked humans, she led him deeper into the maze of ruins. Away from the battlefield, away from everything he thought he knew, and into a future tangled with secrets, survival, and the slow, terrible pull of a bond neither of them had chosen. Somewhere overhead, unnoticed, the first stars began to pierce through the wounded sky. The night had deepened into a kind of bruised purple, lit only by the occasional flicker of distant fires and the sullen glow of orbital debris cutting slow arcs across the sky. Somewhere beyond the broken horizon, the war still raged, plasma cannons vomiting green fire into the clouds, the heavy thud of railguns like the slow heartbeat of a dying world. But here, nestled in the skeletal remains of an abandoned supply depot, there was an uneasy, unnatural calm. Jonas sat with his back against a half-melted cargo container, trying very hard not to think about the fact that he was technically committing treason by merely breathing the same air as his rescuer. His side ached like he'd been stomped by a mech, but the wounds were gone, healed so cleanly it was unsettling. Occasionally, he caught himself poking at the spot just to make sure it hadn't all been a hallucination brought on by blood loss. Across from him, Kassira crouched by a portable field cooker she'd salvaged from a wreck, muttering to herself in her native language. Jonas was almost sure he caught a few words that sounded suspiciously like half-witted monkey blood and why me, universe. So, Jonas said, trying to inject some levity into the crushing silence, is this where you fatten me up before you eat me? Because fair warning, rations have not been kind to my flavor profile. Kassira shot him a look that could have frozen fire. Please, I have standards. Jonas grinned, emboldened by the fact that she hadn't yet hurled a plasma blade at his forehead. You say that now. Wait until you've smelled me after 3 days without a proper shower. Kassira grimaced. I have smelled worse things. Once during a siege on Vecthar 3, our forward camp ran out of decontamination units. We had to live with humans for weeks. I would rather chew glass. Wow, Jonas said, mock-wounded. You really know how to make a guy feel special? She ignored him, fiddling with the field cooker until it finally sputtered to life, releasing a thin, wavering heat signature. Kassira tossed a pair of protein slabs, jury-rigged from whatever the previous owners had left behind. onto the heating plate. The smell that rose was not exactly promising. Jonas wrinkled his nose. Smells like regret. Better than nothing, Kassira said, straight-faced. Or would you prefer to eat your own boots? Jonas glanced down at his mud-caked, half-destroyed boots. Hard pass. The meal was, against all odds, edible. Barely. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by Jonas occasionally making dramatic gagging noises, to which Kassira responded with increasing levels of disdain. When the food was gone, and the faint warmth from the cooker had faded, Jonas leaned back, staring up at the sky. Through the ragged gaps in the depot's shattered ceiling, he could see the stars, thousands of them smeared across the darkness like spilled silver dust. You ever think, he said after a long moment, that all this, he waved a hand vaguely toward the distant war, is just insanely stupid? Kassira didn't answer immediately. She was watching the sky too, her long ears twitching subtly as she listened to things Jonas couldn't hear. Finally, she said, stupidity is a universal constant. The method changes, but the outcome is always the same. Jonas chuckled. That's comforting. I aim to inspire, Kassira deadpanned. He smiled, then winced as he shifted. Seriously, though, how did we end up here? Humans and Bloodborne. Fighting over what? A couple of patches of dirt and a few resource nodes? Kassira tilted her head, considering. Fear, she said finally. Your kind fears what it cannot control. And mine. She paused, a wry smile playing at her lips. We are not particularly good at making ourselves less terrifying. Jonas snorted. Understatement of the century. A soft beep interrupted them, Kassira's armor flashing a discreet warning across her forearm display. Jonas squinted at it, catching flashes of alien script and strange symbols. Problem? He asked. Patrols, she said, rising smoothly to her feet. Several. Scanning for survivors and anomalies. Jonas struggled upright, feeling every molecule of exhaustion in his bones. Good news just keeps on coming. You humans have a saying, do you not? Kassira said, her eyes gleaming in the dark. When it rains, it pours. Yeah, we usually say it with more swearing. She smiled, not warmly, but not entirely coldly either, and extended a hand. Jonas hesitated only a moment before taking it. They moved quickly, slipping through the skeletal remains of the depot like shadows. Kassira led the way, her armor adjusting its color and texture to match the surrounding ruins. Jonas did his best to follow without tripping over every piece of debris in his path. They ducked into the collapsed entrance of a service tunnel just as the first patrol passed overhead. A sleek, insectile hovercraft bristling with sensor arrays and weapon pods. Its searchlights swept the ruins, lingering for a terrifying moment on the spot where they had been sitting minutes before. Jonas held his breath, heart hammering so loudly he was sure the patrol would hear it. Beside him, Kassira was unnervingly calm, her expression serene, almost bored. She caught his eye and, with infuriating casualness, mimed relax with a flick of her fingers. Jonas resisted the urge to throttle her. When the patrol finally moved on, he exhaled shakily. You enjoy that, don't you? A little, Kassira admitted. You have a twisted sense of fun. She shrugged. Survival is tedious. One must find amusement where one can. They waited a few more minutes, then continued deeper into the tunnel. The air grew colder, damp with the scent of rust and decay. Strange graffiti adorned the walls, faded warnings from another war, another lifetime. As they walked, Jonas asked, So, where exactly are we going? Or are you just leading me in circles until I drop dead? There's a safe house, Kassira said. Old Bloodborne installation, hidden, abandoned, or at least it was the last time anyone checked. Jonas raised an eyebrow. And if it's not abandoned? Kassira flashed him a grin that was all teeth. Then you will get to meet my extended family. They are far less charming than I am. Jonas groaned. Oh, good. Family reunions. Just what I needed to complete the worst week of my life. Ahead, the tunnel forked into darkness, each path yawning like the open maw of some sleeping beast. Kassira paused, scanning the air with her ears, listening for sounds Jonas couldn't hear. Left, she said finally. You sure? He asked. No, she said, already moving. Jonas followed, muttering under his breath. Nothing like blind optimism to really round out the apocalypse. As they plunged into the deeper dark, the world above, the war, the armies, the endless politics, seemed to fall away. Down here it was just two souls stumbling through the forgotten bones of an older world, bound together by accident, blood, and a growing, reluctant trust neither of them quite knew what to do with yet. The safe house wasn't exactly what Jonas had pictured. In his mind, it had been a sleek subterranean facility full of cutting-edge tech and gleaming walls. Maybe even a hidden armory or two. Something dramatic befitting an ancient and terrifying alien species. What he found instead was a damp, creaking bunker cobbled together from rusted metal plates and overgrown with phosphorescent moss that glowed a sickly green. Half the walls looked like they might collapse if someone sneezed too hard. A forgotten console near the entrance emitted a sad little whine every few seconds, as if it, too, were disappointed with itself. Kessira moved through the space with the weary familiarity of someone who had seen too many wars and too many abandoned dreams. She brushed a hand along the cracked control panel, murmuring a few words in her own language. To Jonas's surprise, the panel coughed to life, throwing flickering holograms into the air. Maps, status readouts, ancient alerts about forgotten invasions. "Welcome to luxury accommodations," Jonas said, waving at a moss-covered bench. "5-star rating on rottendwellings.com. Kessira gave him a flat look. "If you are unhappy, I can leave you outside with the patrols." He held up his hands in surrender. "Hey, I'll take moldy alien bunkers over angry death squads any day." They secured the entrance as best they could, which mostly involved jamming a broken mech limb against the door and hoping for the best, and settled into a wary, exhausted truce. Jonas found a relatively clean patch of floor and collapsed onto it, groaning. For a few blessed moments, there was nothing but silence. No pursuit, no gunfire, no existential dread, aside from the usual background hum. "You're remarkably good at not dying," Kessira said at last, breaking the quiet. Jonas chuckled, rubbing his eyes. "It's my third best skill." "Oh," she said, an eyebrow arching. "And the other two?" "Making bad jokes," he said, holding up a finger, "and trusting people I probably shouldn't." Kessira smiled faintly. "A dangerous combination." "Tell me about it," Jonas said, thinking back to all the times that very combination had landed him in a medbay, a jail cell, or a very awkward conversation with a superior officer. But this time felt different. This time, trusting someone dangerous hadn't led him into ruin. It had saved him. "You never told me why you helped me," he said, sitting up and meeting her gaze. "You could have left me there." Kessira looked away, her face unreadable. For a long time, she said nothing. Then quietly, "I was tired." He blinked. "Tired? Tired of watching everything die," she said. "Tired of obeying orders written by creatures who forgot what it means to be alive. Tired of pretending that survival is the same thing as living." Jonas absorbed that, feeling something shift inside him. Something bigger than gratitude, bigger than debt. "You humans," Kessira went on, her voice low, "you are reckless, short-lived, emotional. You leap before you look. You make the worst decisions for the stupidest reasons." She turned back to him, her pale eyes fierce. "But you fight, not just because someone told you to. You fight because you choose to." He smiled a little crookedly. "We're too stubborn to know when to quit." "Perhaps," she said, "or perhaps you remember something my kind forgot." They lapsed into silence again, but this time it was companionable, like two weary soldiers sharing a last cigarette before the next battle. When Jonas finally spoke, his voice was lighter. "So, what now? We start a tiny, poorly funded rebellion out of this moldy death trap?" Kessira laughed, a short, sharp bark of genuine amusement. "Hardly. We survive. We find others. Quietly, carefully. Change begins not with armies," she said, tapping her temple, "but with ideas. And maybe a few badly timed explosions?" Jonas suggested hopefully. Kessira's smile widened. "That too." They spent the next few hours patching up the bunker as best they could. Jonas discovered he had a real talent for coaxing half-dead alien tech back to life, or at least for smacking it until it grudgingly obeyed. Kassira was impressed, though she hid it behind her usual mask of dry sarcasm. When night fell fully, if it could be called night in a world perpetually lit by burning skies, Jonas sat with Kassira at the entrance, watching the stars through the broken hatchway. "You know," he said, nudging her with his shoulder, "you're not as terrifying as I expected." "I can remedy that," Kassira said with mock solemnity. "Give me a few hours." "I'll take my chances," Jonas said, grinning. They fell quiet again, and Jonas realized with a strange pang that he didn't want this moment to end. That in the wreckage of a world gone mad, he had found something rare, a connection forged not by duty or survival alone, but by choice, by trust. He thought back to the man he'd been 3 days ago, scared, desperate, bleeding out in the dirt. That man had seen Kassira as a monster. Now sitting beside her under a fractured sky, he saw something else entirely. A friend, a partner, maybe something even more important. A reminder that no matter how deep the darkness, light could find a way to survive. "Hey," Jonas said, leaning back and looking at the stars. "You think there's still a place out there where we're not enemies?" Kassira followed his gaze, her face unreadable for a moment. Then she nodded, slow and certain. "If there is not," she said, "then we will make one." Jonas smiled. "Good, because I'm terrible at giving up." She reached over and ruffled his hair with a clawed hand, a gesture half annoyed, half affectionate. "Stubborn monkey blood," she said fondly. "Terrifying bat lady," he shot back, grinning. And for the first time in a long while, Jonas felt something stronger than fear, stronger even than hope. He felt alive. The war would rage on. There would be losses, betrayals, battles yet to fight. But for now, in this broken place between worlds, two unlikely allies had chosen something stronger than survival. They had chosen each other. Above them, the first true star, not a satellite, not a burning wreck, but a real, steady light, broke through the smoky heavens. It shone down on them, stubborn and brilliant, and refused to fade. The moment Vera stepped onto the ground of the human colony, she felt the faintest hum of dissonance. It was subtle, a kind of cosmic interference, like a glitch in a perfect symphony. Her long ears twitched, and her eyes narrowed as she adjusted the color of her armored suit to a confident crimson. The sleek material shimmered, catching the faint glow of the colony's twin suns as they dipped behind a distant mountain range. The air tasted wrong, a strange mixture of synthetic ozone and something she couldn't quite place, something organic. Yet the moment had arrived. It was time to put this human in his place. Vera had been sent here for a reason. The Aranthi Dominion had conducted their research, and they were sure of one thing. Humans were weak. Unpredictable, yes, but weak. And the colony, nestled on the edge of human expansion into a cluster of promising stars, would be a perfect test. If these humans couldn't even manage a basic defense against a single Aranthi warrior, what hope did they have against an empire that spanned more than 40 systems? She approached the designated duel zone, a circular arena marked by flickering holographic lights and half-baked drones zipping overhead like drunk fireflies. The crowd gathered, a ragtag group of colonists, some on foot, some floating in hoversuits, a few robots milling about in the back, possibly there for entertainment, possibly there to observe her impending victory. Vera could hear them whispering in awe, though she wasn't sure if they were admiring her or wondering if the human could survive her first strike. The truth she knew was irrelevant. The challenge had been accepted. The countdown began. 30 seconds, announced the AI referee, its voice smooth and emotionless, like every other AI she had ever encountered. She smirked to herself. It's only going to take 1 minute, she thought, adjusting her stance. This would be easy. 15 seconds, the AI continued. Vera cracked her knuckles, her gaze never leaving the human standing at the center of the ring. Ian, he was called, but honestly, that didn't matter. He was no more than an insect to her. Her gaze flickered down to her wrist for a moment, where an encrypted message from her superior buzzed. Do not underestimate the humans. They are unpredictable. Vera rolled her eyes. Unpredictable. My left ear. 10 seconds, the AI intoned. Ian looked, well, less than impressive. He stood there in a wrinkled t-shirt with some nonsense text that said, I'm just here for the snacks. His sneakers were battered, like they'd seen more than their fair share of disaster, and his hair, disheveled and unkempt, gave him the look of someone who had just been dragged out of a nap he definitely hadn't wanted to take. In short, Vera couldn't believe this was her opponent. Even the way he fidgeted, scratching the back of his head, his eyes darting from one corner of the arena to another, like he was looking for the exit, suggested someone who had no idea what was about to hit him. 3, 2, 1. The AI's countdown was precise, methodical. It felt almost ceremonial. And then it happened. Vera moved first, her feet a blur as she closed the distance between them in half a heartbeat. She was faster than the eye could follow, her armor shifting in tune with the rhythmic beat of her pulse. With a swift, practiced strike, she aimed for his chest, fully intending to send him sprawling, incapacitated by the force. But then, inexplicably, Ian sidestepped. Not in any graceful way, mind you. He simply shuffled. A half-hearted step to the left, more like someone trying to avoid a falling pigeon than a trained fighter evading an assault. But somehow she missed. Not by much, but enough to stagger forward, her momentum carrying her off balance for a brief, unexpected moment. Her brow furrowed. Impossible. She didn't have time to recover before he did something even stranger. Without turning around or even making a deliberate move, Ian's right hand shot out toward a floating drone hovering nearby, just a few feet above his head. The drone, presumably there to film the match, whirred and buzzed as if reacting to a command. And then, and this was the part that really threw her off, it spun around, malfunctioning, as if it had been caught in an invisible net. There was a brief, ridiculous moment where the drone's artificial intelligence seemed to short-circuit, broadcasting a series of confused beeps. In a panic, the drone blasted a burst of spark and smoke right into Vera's face. She staggered back, her vision blurring for half a second, the intense heat of the drone's failure singeing her cheek. Ian, meanwhile, stood there, blinking up at the sky, completely unaware of the chaos he just caused. You all right? He called out, scratching his head. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. Vera stood there furious, but more confused than anything else. That wasn't supposed to happen. Oh, you know what? It's fine, Ian continued, looking mildly apologetic. These drones, they've got a mind of their own sometimes. You just gotta give them a little direction. Like a suggestion, you know? Vera, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events, narrowed her eyes. I will not be humiliated by a malfunctioning drone, she muttered under her breath, her voice just a bit more clipped than before. She steadied herself, taking a deep breath, before focusing once more on her human adversary. Ian, though, seemed completely unfazed by the situation. He actually yawned and stretched out his arms. Well, if we're going to be here a while, can we at least get some popcorn? He asked casually, nodding toward a nearby vendor who seemed equally confused by the scene unfolding. The crowd, clearly entertained by the absurdity of the situation, began to murmur, laughter bubbling up around the arena. Vera's patience was wearing thin, but she had no choice but to continue. You've only delayed the inevitable, she said, narrowing her eyes at him, her voice like a blade. I will defeat you. Ian gave her an exaggerated look of mock concern. Really? 'Cause I was kind of hoping for a rematch with snacks involved. You know, like a little more fun, a little less villainous monologuing? He grinned, leaning casually on one hip, completely at ease in the face of impending doom. Vera growled under her breath. What is this human? And with that thought, she launched herself forward again, this time with a more measured, deliberate strike, determined not to be thwarted by his oddities. But just as she closed in, Ian did something even stranger. He simply stood still. No dodging, no sudden movements. He just stood there. For a moment, Vera wondered if he had finally realized his fate. But then, with a slight tilt of his head in a wide, unrepentant grin, Ian spoke the words she would never forget. Your turn. Try to hit me. And that, more than anything else, is what made her hesitate. Something inside her, something deeply ingrained in the Aranthe sense of superiority, began to fracture. What is this human? The real game, it seemed, had only just begun. The air crackled with tension, but not the kind Vera was used to. No, this tension was unusual, almost absurd. Here she was, standing in the midst of an arena, facing a human who had yet to even break a sweat. And yet everything about this encounter felt wrong. She had struck with precision, intent, and power, and he had simply stood there, waiting. For a moment she had thought the human had lost his nerve, that he had finally realized the sheer gulf between their strength and his puny, fragile existence. But no, Ian had stood there, hands in his pockets, like he was waiting for her to finish a badly told joke. "Are you done?" he asked casually. "Because I'm starting to think we're just going in circles here." Vera blinked. Her ears twitched, a reflexive action from the sheer absurdity of his words. What?" she muttered, trying to recalibrate her thoughts. "I'm not going in circles. I'm trying to defeat you." Ian scratched his head, making a show of looking at his wrist as if he wore an invisible watch. "Well, I guess you're taking your time, huh?" She stared at him, the confusion growing like an ivy vine choking the edges of her resolve. "This is not a joke. You are facing an Aranthe warrior, a trained fighter. You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Oh no, I get it," Ian said, nodding with exaggerated sincerity. "You're from another planet, and you've got superior skills or whatever." He gave a shrug that could not have been more nonchalant. I've seen this before. My neighbor Tim, he's from a place called Corporate America, and he used to try to flex his power every time we played cards. But let me tell you, that guy was all talk, just like you." "Corporate America? Is that—" Vera cut herself off, her mind spinning as she tried to process the nonsense coming from this human's mouth. "You are comparing me to a card player?" "Sure am," Ian said, grinning. "But hey, let's be fair. Tim wasn't very good at cards either. He always folded when it came to blackjack." Vera took a deep breath. "You're unbelievable," she said, her voice suddenly colder. "But fine. If you insist on this ridiculous game, I will just have to adjust my strategy." "Good," Ian said, his tone playful. "I was hoping for a little bit of a challenge. You know, like, hey, can you stop throwing things at me, though?" He ducked, barely missing the stray energy pulse that she had sent spiraling toward him in frustration. For the first time, she had to stop and reconsider. This wasn't like any human she'd encountered before. There were no pleasantries, no diplomacy. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even trying to fight in any way that made sense. It was as if he were more concerned with annoying her than actually surviving. Vera, who had been trained to confront powerful foes with the singular goal of domination, found herself caught off guard by the human's bizarre approach to survival. The power she had sensed earlier, that hidden force, seemed even more elusive now. She could feel it still, just beneath the surface, like a secret waiting to be uncovered, but she needed to know how to reach it. "All right, enough of this," she snapped, her patience growing thin. "Let's see how you handle this." Her voice was sharp, and the very air seemed to grow heavier as her power flared. With a thought, she activated a pulse from her suit, a wave of pure kinetic energy designed to knock the human off his feet and force him to the ground. A simple technique, effective. No time wasted. But once again, Ian did the unexpected. Instead of bracing for impact, instead of even flinching, he dropped to the ground and rolled. Just like a human, awkwardly, almost comically. He didn't try to dodge the pulse with skill or grace. No, he ignored it altogether, as if the pulse didn't matter. He landed, sat up, and then wiped some dust off his shirt as though he had just gotten out of bed. "Okay, that was kind of rude," he said, looking up at her with mild annoyance, as though she'd just knocked over his coffee. "What's with the overkill? I'm still standing here, aren't I?" Her mind reeled. How is he doing this? With a snap of her fingers, Vera called forth the gravity manipulators in her suit, creating a small localized field that would increase the force of gravity in Ian's immediate vicinity. The result would be that he would be pinned to the floor, struggling to breathe, his every movement slowed. She had used this technique on creatures far stronger than he. Yet when the field activated, Ian simply lay there, as if the crushing force wasn't even touching him. "Okay, now you're just showing off," he said with a smirk, though his voice was still lighthearted. "I mean, really? How many of these moves do you have?" Vera took a step back, her mind racing. How was he not affected by her gravity field? No human should have been able to resist it. This wasn't normal, but she had to admit, he wasn't struggling. He was relaxed, completely at ease. That's when she realized something, the change in his behavior, the strange calm, the effortless deflection of every force she applied. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't his luck. It wasn't even a product of some physical anomaly. It was something else. Something human. Ian wasn't playing by the same rules. The sudden realization hit her like a shockwave. She had been underestimating him. It wasn't just that he was unpredictable. It was that his very nature defied her understanding. Humans, she'd been told, were weak, easily manipulated by their emotions, incapable of true resilience. Yet here Ian was, proving her wrong at every turn. "Okay, now this is just getting interesting," Ian said, as though reading her thoughts, his smile widening. "You're really going to have to step up your game, lady. I'm all for a good challenge." Vera, still unsure whether she wanted to strangle him or analyze him, decided to try one last tactic. She raised her hands and the arena's perimeter lighting flickered, signaling that the final move was coming. "You've had your fun, human. Let's see if you can withstand an actual challenge." The ground beneath them shifted, and an array of metallic arms shot up from the arena floor, each one holding a different weapon. Energy whips, plasma blades, and shock pulses designed to overwhelm even the most advanced defenses. Vera had mastered each of these weapons, and she was about to show Ian exactly what he was up against. But Ian just chuckled. "Oh, this is gonna be fun." And with that, everything around him changed. The weapons, the arena, all of it began to distort in the strangest, most chaotic fashion. A low hum vibrated the very air, and Ian's eyes glinted with a spark she hadn't noticed before. Oh no, she thought. The game had just shifted again. The strange hum that vibrated the very air around them grew louder, almost deafening. It was a noise that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, as if the entire arena were caught between dimensions. Vera's eyes darted, trying to make sense of the shifting metal arms and weapons now suspended in midair, their lines of motion bending unnaturally, like a well-organized dance, but one conducted by an unpredictable conductor. For a moment, the arena itself seemed to hold its breath. Okay, I didn't expect the entire place to go Matrix on me," Ian said, holding up his hands as if to gesture at the weapons floating around him. "But sure, let's do this. It'll make things way more exciting." Vera's mind raced. The weapons, plasma whips, energy blades, sharp-edged force fields, they were all moving according to an unpredictable pattern. This was not her doing. This was not her mastery of the arena's tech. This was him. Somehow Ian had triggered a shift in the very fabric of reality, and in a flash she realized he wasn't just standing there, unaffected. No, he was shaping the outcome. He had become a part of the environment. "How?" Vera demanded, unable to suppress the edge in her voice. Ian glanced up at her, grinning. "How? Well, it's not like I have all the answers, but I think you're finally figuring it out. It's me, right? I've got this thing, like a connection with reality. At first I didn't know what it was, but it turns out I'm a little special when it comes to manipulating the universe. Pretty neat, huh?" Her mind was a swirl of confusion and realization. He was controlling the environment. But how? No human could manipulate physical laws like this. I thought humans were weak," she muttered to herself. The irony of the situation was almost too much. The entire Aranthi Dominion, her entire race, had underestimated the unpredictable nature of humanity. They had thought them chaotic, easily broken. And yet Ian wasn't chaotic. He was simply alive in a way that was too complex to grasp. His strength lay not in power or manipulation, but in something deeper, something inherently human. She glanced at him, her ears twitching in frustration and awe. "You're not even trying to fight me, are you?" He shrugged, casually dodging a plasma whip that came a little too close for comfort. "Nah, I mean, look at you. You're awesome and all, but honestly, I'm just here to enjoy the ride. Let's not make this a death match, okay?" Vera felt her frustration flare again, but this time there was a shift in her perception. She wasn't just facing an unpredictable human anymore. She was facing something else entirely. Ian had tapped into something so basic, so profound, that the very fabric of the arena bent in response. It wasn't power. It wasn't brute force. It was something that defied logic, a force born of humanity itself. It was the force of life, of choice, the refusal to be bound by the rules. As Ian danced around the floating weapons, he didn't move with the precision of a trained fighter. Instead, his actions were clumsy, erratic, uncoordinated, yet somehow it worked. He was just there, a presence that could not be ignored. "You really are something else," Vera muttered, more to herself than to him. He shot her a grin, his eyes gleaming with something mischievous. "Yeah, well, I try. It's not every day I get to face a space warrior and, not die." He paused. "By the way, you might want to duck." Vera barely had time to react before a massive energy pulse shot through the air, narrowly missing her as she dodged to the side. The pulse hit the arena walls, sending a shock wave through the entire structure, sending a chorus of mechanical whines echoing across the space. The floating weapons now spun around wildly, as if confused by the sudden disruption, and in that moment, Vera realized something. Ian had tapped into the very energy of the arena, the way it was meant to be used. It wasn't about controlling, overpowering, or defeating. It was about syncing with it, becoming part of it. "Okay, okay," she said, finally allowing herself a chuckle. "You win, human. I get it." Ian stopped mid-dance, his expression a mix of confusion and curiosity. "Wait, wait, what do you mean?" Vera's gaze softened for the first time since their match began. "I underestimated you. I thought you were just chaotic. But you, Ian, you're not just surviving. You're living. You bend the rules not with force, but with your existence. You make reality work for you, without ever truly trying to control it." Ian blinked. Um, I mean, I guess. I still don't know what I'm doing, but it feels right." "Weird, huh?" "Very," she said, smiling despite herself. "And you know, maybe that's something I can learn from. I've spent so long thinking control was the key to everything. But maybe the key is letting go." Ian stretched, hands behind his head, as if nothing in the universe could ever bother him. "That's like way deeper than I expected. But hey, if you want, we can grab a drink later and talk about it more." "I'm good with that." "Drinks," Vera repeated, a grin tugging at the corners of her mouth. You humans have strange priorities, but I think I could get used to that. Maybe, maybe we could start with some snacks. You do have snacks, right?" Ian's face lit up. "Snacks? You're speaking my language now." The atmosphere around them, once charged with the intensity of their battle, had shifted. The arena no longer hummed with the threat of destruction, but with something else entirely, an unspoken understanding. Vera had come to the colony to show her superiority, to prove the power of the Aranthi Dominion. What she hadn't counted on was that in this one human, she would encounter something even more powerful: the ability to live freely, without constraints, and to shape reality in a way that no empire could ever truly control. As they walked toward the exit of the arena, the crowd, who had been watching, rapt, finally broke into spontaneous applause, some laughing, some cheering, others simply shaking their heads in disbelief. Even the sentient soda machine emitted a series of happy bleeps, as if it too recognized the absurd beauty of the moment. "So," Ian said, turning to Vera as they left the arena, "you think I've got this power thing figured out?" Vera chuckled, a genuine sound that surprised even her. "Maybe not figured out, but you've certainly shown me that sometimes The best way to win isn't to fight at all. Ian grinned. Good thing, too. I was never really one for fighting. And as they disappeared into the night, the stars overhead seemed to wink in agreement. Perhaps, just perhaps, the universe had always known what it was doing when it placed the Aranthi warrior and the unpredictable human in the same space. The real challenge, after all, had always been about finding common ground. And in that, Ian had proven far more formidable than any empire could ever be. It all started, as most of Ethan Morgan's bad ideas did, with a free drink and a half-baked dare. The Intergalactic Summit was the sort of event where politicians wore gravity-defying suits, aliens flaunted extra limbs like fashion statements, and the buffet tables looked like art installations built by someone who had never seen food before. Ethan, low-ranking diplomat and full-time accidental trouble magnet, was trying his best not to get fired before dessert. His primary mission was simple: represent Earth, shake a few tentacles, and avoid starting any wars. And then he saw her. It was impossible not to. Across the polished crystal floor, under the pulsing light of a suspended miniature sun, she stood like a storm bottled inside a dress of shifting silver threads. Her skin was luminous, almost human, but kissed with an otherworldly pale glow. Her hair spilled down her back in a river of molten gold, and her ears, long, tapered elegantly like a sculptor's dream, peeked through in a way that made Ethan's mouth go dry. She moved with a lethal grace, like a blade barely sheathed. For a moment he forgot where he was. Forgot he was wearing a rental suit 2 sizes too big. Forgot that the ambassador had told him, in no uncertain terms, "Ethan, for the love of every god known to sentient beings, do not get involved in any diplomatic incidents." Which was unfortunate, because at that exact moment, she turned her gaze on him and smiled. There are smiles that promise polite conversation. There are smiles that hint at mischief. Hers was neither. It was a challenge, an invitation to fall headfirst into something that would undoubtedly end with explosions, lawsuits, or both. His buddy from the logistics crew, Jonas, elbowed him hard enough to knock the breath out of him. "Don't even think about it, man. That's Leora Velsharn, Eldrith nobility. She's, very important." "Important how?" Ethan croaked, still staring. "Like, if you spill your drink on her, Earth might end up as somebody's backyard barbecue pit." "Good to know," Ethan muttered, brushing imaginary dust off his jacket and deciding that fate, clearly, had chosen violence tonight. Before he could second-guess himself, he crossed the floor. The force field separating the dignitaries from the rest of the rabble shimmered faintly, like a bubble blown from starlight. As he approached, the guard, a humorless slab of meat in chrome armor, gave him the kind of look normally reserved for viruses and particularly annoying hovercraft salesmen. "I'm on the guest list," Ethan lied cheerfully. The guard didn't even blink. "Name? Sir Ethan of Morgan, slayer of awkward conversations." A moment passed. Another. Then the guard's visor flickered and inexplicably parted to let him through. Ethan made a mental note to both thank and bribe whoever had hacked the security system on his behalf. And then he was standing before her. Up close, she was even more devastating. Her eyes weren't just blue. They were deep enough to fall into, speckled with tiny flecks of silver, like someone had trapped entire galaxies in them. She smelled faintly of something alien and addictive. Cool night air after a storm, electric and dangerous. "You," she said, voice soft and musical, "are either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." "Can it be both?" Ethan grinned. "I multitask." She laughed. It wasn't a polite, courtly chuckle, but a genuine sound, rich and startled. Around them, dignitaries whispered and turned to stare, but Leora paid them no mind. She tilted her head, studying him like he was an unexpectedly fascinating bug. "I am Leora Velsharn," she said. "Ethan Morgan," he replied, "Earth's ambassador of poor decisions." She smiled again. God, that smile. And Ethan's stomach did a somersault. Before he could say something else embarrassingly stupid, an older Eldrith man approached. His robes shimmered with authority, and his expression said he would rather be anywhere else, perhaps being gnawed on by space piranhas. "Your Majesty," he said stiffly, bowing, "the council has convened. It is time." "Majesty?" Ethan blinked. He opened his mouth, closed it, and tried very hard not to panic. Leora turned back to him, her eyes alight with mischief. "Walk with me, Sir Ethan." It wasn't a request. Stumbling after her through winding crystal halls, Ethan learned several important things in quick succession. 1. The Eldrith took their traditions very seriously. 2. By accepting her invitation and entering the diplomatic enclosure without official sanction, he had accidentally triggered something called the right of first bond. And 3. He was now unofficially, pending about 50 layers of bureaucratic approval, engaged to the crown princess of the Eldrith Empire. There was a pause while his brain tried to process that. "Wait," he said finally, voice cracking slightly. "Are you saying we're—" "Betrothed," Leora confirmed, tone suspiciously cheerful. "Like, married? Eventually. It's all very ceremonial. Unless you object?" Her eyes glinted. He did object. Very much. He objected with every fiber of his being. Unfortunately, the alternative seemed to involve starting a small, incredibly messy interstellar war. So Ethan, in a fit of what he could only later describe as terminal stupidity, shrugged and said, "Sure. Why not? What's the worst that could happen?" By the time the wedding ceremony started, Ethan had resigned himself to his fate. The Grand Hall of Eldrith was an architectural wonder, a cathedral of living crystal that sang when you brushed against it. Leora stood across from him in a gown that shimmered like captured starlight, looking simultaneously regal and ready to bite someone's head off. At the time, he thought that was just a figure of speech. The officiant, a giant orb of sentient plasma named Reverence, floated between them and droned solemn words in a language that sounded suspiciously like someone gargling marbles. Ethan's translation earpiece struggled valiantly. He hesitated for a millisecond too long. Leora's long ears twitched in warning. "I do," he blurted. She smiled at him, a smile full of promises and secrets. He smiled back, pretending he wasn't absolutely sure he had just signed his own death warrant. When the ceremony ended, and the cheers and several ominous howls of the gathered Eldrith filled the hall, Leora leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear. "You are mine now, husband," she whispered, her breath cool against his skin. Somewhere deep inside him, Ethan heard a tiny voice squeak. "This is fine. Everything's fine. We're all fine here." And for a moment, he almost believed it. Almost. Their honeymoon began aboard the Celestial Waltz, a luxury pleasure cruiser that drifted lazily through the Seraphim Nebula, which, according to the tourist pamphlet, was best enjoyed with a cocktail in one hand and zero expectations of surviving the local wildlife. Ethan had barely finished unpacking his one suitcase, containing 3 shirts, 2 pairs of socks, and a pocket translation guide titled "How Not to Accidentally Propose Marriage in 40 Alien Languages," when Leora swept into their suite like a storm with impeccable hair. She wore a flowing tunic embroidered with constellations, and despite the casual attire, still managed to look like she could command a fleet with a snap of her fingers. "We have a reception tonight," she announced, tossing a holographic invitation at him. "Diplomats, minor royalty, at least 2 assassins pretending to be caterers." Ethan caught the invitation clumsily. "Sounds cozy. Should I bring a casserole?" She gave him a look, half amused, half exasperated. "Just try not to get poisoned before dessert." "That's a lot of pressure. What if I only get slightly poisoned?" "You're remarkably optimistic for a man so frequently in mortal peril." He grinned. "Part of my charm." The reception was held in the ship's grand ballroom, a vast chamber of transparent walls that gave the unnerving illusion of dancing directly among the stars. Ethan spent the first hour dodging suspicious-looking appetizers, and the second hour trying to keep track of the number of languages he was accidentally butchering. Leora, meanwhile, glided through the crowd like a queen among planets, accepting greetings, exchanging diplomatic platitudes, and occasionally shooting Ethan glances that felt somewhere between "I'm proud of you" and "I will murder you if you start a conga line." Somewhere between his third and fourth awkward handshake with a sentient bouquet of flowers representing the Trillion Confederacy, Ethan noticed something odd. Leora wasn't eating, at all. While Ethan politely pretended to enjoy something that might have once been meat, or a very angry vegetable. She moved among the guests without touching a single dish. When offered a goblet of spiced nebula wine, she merely smiled and passed it along. Maybe it was just a cultural thing. Maybe the Eldrith didn't eat at social functions. Or maybe, his mind offered unhelpfully, she's a vampire who survives by draining the life force from unsuspecting diplomats. Ethan chuckled to himself, then paused. Because if he was honest, there had been other strange things, like the way Leora seemed most alive under the twin moons of Valthera during their brief stopover. How her reflection in the silvered pools of the pleasure gardens seemed to ripple oddly, like a signal struggling through static. How, in their shared suite, she sometimes stood for hours by the observation window, not moving, her breath misting faintly against the glass while the stars wheeled around them. Ethan decided he was overthinking things. Probably, hopefully. Besides, if she were going to eat him, she probably would have done it already, right? Still, caution and several decades of bad decisions dictated that he do some discreet investigating, which was how he found himself 3 nights later, crouched behind a decorative fountain shaped like an 8-armed squid, spying on his own wife during her midnight stroll through the ship's gardens. It wasn't exactly his proudest moment, especially when the fountain decided mid-surveillance that he looked dehydrated and blasted him with a jet of scented mist. Spluttering, half-blinded, and smelling vaguely of alien lilacs, Ethan tried to regain his dignity as Leora turned, perfectly composed, and arched an eyebrow at him. "Hiding from me, husband." "Stretching," Ethan lied instantly. "Fountains are great for, limbering up." She strolled closer, predatory grace in every step. Her smile was amused, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. "If you have questions," she said softly, "you should ask them. I prefer honesty." Ethan hesitated. Then, because he'd already made an idiot of himself, he decided he might as well dive into the deep end. "Are you," he said, voice cracking slightly, "a vampire?" There was a long, thick silence. Somewhere in the distance, the ship's automated entertainment system started playing smooth jazz, as if trying to diffuse the tension. Leora's expression didn't change immediately. Then, very slowly, she laughed, a rich melodic sound that wrapped around him like a warm blanket and a sharp blade all at once. "A vampire," she repeated, shaking her head. "Is that what you think?" "Well," Ethan said, feeling absurd, "you don't eat. You love the night. Your reflection does weird things, and there's the whole mysterious ancient people with a thing for bloodlines vibe you've got going on." She stepped so close he could feel the cold energy radiating from her, a subtle thrum beneath his skin. She tilted her head, studying him. "I am Eldrith," she said at last. "We are different. Older than most races know. Our sustenance is not like yours. We draw life from energy, from essence, not from blood. It is ancient science woven into our biology, a symbiosis, not a slaughter." "So," Ethan said cautiously, "you're more like a very classy energy vampire?" Her mouth twitched. "If you like. And you're not planning to, drain me dry in my sleep?" Her eyes gleamed, but her voice was soft, almost tender. "Not unless you ask very nicely." He snorted, the tension breaking. It wasn't the neat, tidy answer he wanted, but somehow it was enough. For now. They walked together through the gardens, the stars spinning in lazy arcs beyond the transparent ceiling. Somewhere along the path, she slipped her hand into his, her fingers cool but steady. "So," Ethan said, grinning sidelong at her, "if we're being honest, you should know I once failed to make instant noodles. Burned them. The water. Everything." She laughed again, this time full and unguarded. "You are a remarkable creature, Ethan Morgan." "Yeah, well, you married me. So who's the real cautionary tale here?" She squeezed his hand, and for the first time, Ethan felt that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely out of his depth. Of course, he was spectacularly wrong about that. But that was a story for another night. The trouble started with the ship's breakfast buffet. Ethan was halfway through a questionable pile of synthetic pancakes, ingredients sourced from highly sustainable mystery proteins, according to the menu, when the celestial waltz lurched violently, His fork somersaulted into his lap. Alarms whooped. A synthesized voice announced, with far too much enthusiasm, "Brace for unexpected boarding. Have a pleasant day." Across the dining hall, dignitaries screamed, aliens scattered, and one particularly round ambassador tried to roll under a table, but got stuck halfway. Ethan wiped syrup off his face, sighed heavily, and muttered, "Well, there goes the continental breakfast." Leora appeared at his side an instant later, looking infuriatingly composed. She tossed him a slim silver baton that hummed with lethal energy. "Here," she said, "point and click." "Like a remote control?" "Exactly, except it incinerates people." "Neat." They rushed into the corridor as magnetic thuds echoed along the ship's hull, boarding pods attaching like angry barnacles. Ethan caught glimpses of them through the portholes. Black, insectile vessels marked with the sigil of the Draxith Marauders, notorious space raiders with the charming habit of vaporizing hostages after stealing their shoes. "You know," Ethan panted as they ran, "I thought being married to you would be more diplomatic," Leora smirked. "Welcome to marriage, husband. It's rarely what you expect." Before Ethan could deliver a witty comeback, he had several locked and loaded, mostly involving life insurance policies. They skidded into the main atrium. A squad of marauders had already broken through, weapons crackling, faces hidden behind bone-like masks. Leora stepped forward calmly. She didn't draw a weapon. She didn't even raise her voice. She just looked at them. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the nearest marauder dropped his blaster, fell to his knees, and started weeping uncontrollably. His companions weren't far behind, clutching their heads, stumbling backward. Ethan gaped. "What did you do?" "Projected a fragment of my essence," Leora said, as if discussing weather patterns. "Showed them their deepest fears, magnified 1,000-fold. Ethan blinked. "Remind me never to complain about your cooking." They secured the atrium in minutes, but the victory was short-lived. Through the emergency broadcasts, they learned the marauders hadn't just come for loot. They were hunting someone, specifically Leora, and not because of her dazzling fashion sense. The Eldrith, it turned out, weren't just respected across the galaxy. They were feared. Ancient legends spoke of the Blooded, a secret lineage among the Eldrith who could, under certain conditions, awaken powers capable of reshaping matter itself. Energy manipulation, life transference, reality bending. The Marauders believed Leora was one of them, and judging by the casual mind-melting she just performed, Ethan suspected they weren't wrong. As they retreated deeper into the ship, Ethan finally cornered her in a service corridor lined with humming plasma conduits. "You should have told me," he said quietly, "about all this, about you." She looked at him, truly looked at him, with a gaze that peeled away every defense he'd ever built. "I thought if you knew," she said, "you would fear me, or worse, pity me." Ethan, who had spent most of his adult life getting into fistfights with vending machines and losing, couldn't help but laugh. "Leora, you married a man who once tried to bribe a customs officer with expired coupons. I'm not exactly a model of judgment." For the first time, the tension in her shoulders eased, but their moment was shattered as the bulkhead exploded inward. The Marauder commander stomped through, clad in a suit of adaptive armor that crackled with stolen Eldrith tech. He leveled a massive cannon at Leora's heart. "Come quietly," he rasped through his mask, "and your consort will live." Ethan, without thinking, stepped in front of her. Leora made a small, broken sound, half a warning, half a plea, but Ethan just winked over his shoulder. "Relax, I have a plan." The plan, such as it was, involved Ethan lunging forward and wildly mashing buttons on the cannon. Shockingly, this worked about as well as one might expect. The weapon fired in a random direction, blowing a neat hole through the floor. The commander yelped as gravity abruptly stopped playing by the rules and he tumbled into the maintenance decks below, swearing creatively. Ethan peered after him. "Huh, not my worst improvisation." Leora laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and in a blur of motion, sealed the breach with a pulse of shimmering energy. In the aftermath while ship security mopped up the remaining marauders, assisted by several deeply offended trillion flower ambassadors who weaponized their pollen in new and terrifying ways, Ethan and Leora stood side by side in the ruined corridor. "So?" Ethan said casually, brushing soot off his jacket. "Still glad you married me?" She cupped his face in her cool, elegant hands. "More than you will ever know." They kissed there, among the broken wires and the flickering emergency lights, while the stars wheeled endlessly beyond the ship's walls. Later, after the repairs and the interrogations, and a truly spectacular celebratory feast, featuring only minimally hazardous foods, they sat curled together in their suite. Ethan traced lazy patterns on Leora's arm. "So, about the whole ancient cosmic power thing, that gonna, pop up at inconvenient times?" She smiled. "Possibly, especially if you continue burning toast." "One time," he grumbled. "One time, and the fire suppression system still hasn't forgiven me." Her laughter was soft, but her eyes were serious. "You have changed me, Ethan Morgan. You remind me that power alone is meaningless without kindness, without absurdity, without hope." He grinned. "Yeah, I'm basically the galaxy's leading supplier of absurdity. And for that," she said, leaning in, "I am endlessly grateful." They watched the stars together, the future sprawling wide and unknown before them. But for the first time, Ethan didn't feel out of his depth. He wasn't just surviving. He was exactly where he was meant to be, beside a woman who could bend the fabric of reality and still laugh at his terrible jokes. In the grand, swirling dance of the universe, they had found each other. And whatever came next, pirates, space vampire politics, catastrophic buffet incidents, they would face it together, one cosmic disaster at a time. Marcus awoke in darkness, his head throbbing, his limbs stiff and uncooperative. He groaned, blinking rapidly, trying to adjust to the pitch-black void surrounding him. The last thing he remembered was standing on the observation deck of the research ship, staring out into the endless stars, contemplating the next big breakthrough in human space exploration. Now, though, he was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere wrong. He pushed himself up, the cold metal floor beneath him sending a shiver through his spine. The low hum of the ship's engine reverberated through the walls, a sound that should have been comforting, but instead it only added to the sense of isolation. He was locked in some kind of room, a small, cramped space with no windows. The walls, smooth and featureless, offered no clues as to his location. His breath quickened as a thought crossed his mind. Was he alone? Was he in some kind of containment cell? Then he heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible rustle from the corner of the room. He froze. A figure shifted in the shadows and Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Okay, stay calm," he whispered to himself, trying to make sense of the situation. "This is probably some weird dream." "Yeah, a dream. I'll wake up soon. Any minute now." A pair of amber eyes glinted in the dark, catching the faint light that filtered through the door, and Marcus's pulse spiked. It wasn't a dream. Whatever or whoever was in this room with him was very real. The figure stepped into the light, and Marcus's breath caught in his throat. She was tall, her blue skin almost glowing in the dim light. Her long, flowing yellow hair cascaded down her back, glowing faintly as if charged with an inner energy. Her eyes, those piercing amber eyes, studied him with an intensity that made him feel like a bug under a microscope. But it wasn't just her eyes that unnerved him. No, it was the way she stood there, so effortlessly poised and unbothered by his presence. Her long, pointed ears twitched slightly, and Marcus wondered if she could hear his heart pounding in his chest. The silence stretched, growing heavier by the second. The weight of her gaze felt like it was suffocating him, her every movement predatory. He had no idea who or what she was, but one thing was certain. She was no ordinary woman. What are you?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The alien woman didn't respond right away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if sizing him up. He could feel her evaluating him, weighing his worth, or lack thereof. The tension was unbearable. He half expected her to lunge at him, to reveal that she was some kind of apex predator, ready to tear him to pieces. but she didn't move, and the silence lingered. "So," Marcus said, trying to force some humor into the situation, "I guess we're not at a party, huh?" The alien woman's lips twitched. Was that a smile? A smirk? Whatever it wasn't comforting. "Am I," Marcus continued, his voice shaky but growing bolder, "am I supposed to be on the menu here?" Her gaze never wavered. "You will not be eaten," she said in a tone that was both authoritative and almost bored, as if her words were routine. Marcus blinked, taken aback. He had honestly expected something more dramatic, like a declaration of his impending doom or some cryptic alien speech. But instead, she was matter-of-fact about it. He wasn't going to be eaten. That was oddly comforting. "Great," Marcus muttered, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "No dinner plans tonight. That's a relief." The alien woman finally moved, her long ears twitching again. "You are not the one I seek," she said, "but you are here nonetheless." "Not the one you seek," Marcus echoed. "I don't suppose you're looking for a good conversation partner either." There was another pause, longer this time, as she assessed him again. Her expression didn't change, but Marcus could almost feel the wheels turning in her mind. "I seek someone else," she said finally, "someone more suited to the task." "Uh, task?" Marcus asked, now thoroughly confused. "What task are we talking about here? Because if it's some kind of escape the room game, I have to warn you, I'm really bad at puzzles." The woman didn't respond to his joke, and that was probably for the best. He couldn't afford to distract himself for too long. As unsettling as the situation was, something was nagging at him, some instinct that told him he needed to stay alert. And there was something about this woman, her presence, that made him feel like he couldn't fully trust her, but at the same time, couldn't turn his back on her either. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by a violent tremor that shook the entire room. Marcus stumbled, his legs unsteady as the floor tilted beneath him. The walls groaned, and a series of mechanical whirs and hisses echoed from beyond the door. His heart pounded again, louder now as the realization set in. The ship was in danger. The alien woman's posture stiffened. She had reacted to the tremor immediately, her body tense, her amber eyes scanning the walls, the door, and the ceiling, as if she were searching for something. "The ship is under attack," she said, her voice low and urgent. Marcus's mind raced. Under attack? By what? Pirates? Space zombies? Something else? She didn't answer right away, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "Does it really matter what's attacking us?" she said, her tone surprisingly dry. "We need to escape." "Oh, now you're talking my language," Marcus said, doing his best to mask his fear with humor. "I'm pretty good at escaping, as long as there aren't any locked doors involved. If there's a locked door, we're all in trouble." The woman didn't laugh. She didn't even acknowledge his joke. Instead, she moved toward the door and inspected the control panel beside it. Her fingers flew over the buttons, swift and precise, though Marcus had no idea what she was doing. He was starting to think she might be some sort of space soldier, or maybe even a spy. Whatever she was certainly more capable than he was in this situation. Just as the door shuddered under the force of another tremor, the alien woman turned to him with a sharp, focused gaze. "Stay close," she said, "and whatever you do, don't make any noise. We need to leave now." Marcus nodded, though he had no idea what kind of trouble they were really in. As he followed her through the dark, empty corridors of the ship, he couldn't help but wonder. Was this really the worst thing that could happen to him? Or was something even worse lurking just beyond the next turn? Marcus stumbled along behind the alien woman, his heart pounding in his ears, his every step an awkward echo in the narrow metallic corridor. The ship creaked and shuddered around them, as if it were a living creature in pain. Emergency lights flickered overhead, casting the hallway in a wash of angry red. It felt like they were crawling through the veins of a dying beast, a dying, mildly resentful beast that smelled faintly of burnt circuitry and disappointment. He risked a glance at his companion. She moved with a predatory grace, her long legs carrying her swiftly and silently forward, her golden hair almost floating behind her like a comet's tail. Her blue skin shimmered under the intermittent lights, and those long, elegant ears twitched at every creak and groan. She was every bit the alien warrior he never asked for, but was somehow stuck with. "So?" Marcus whispered, trying to fill the heavy silence. "Do you have a name, or should I just keep calling you intimidating blue lady in my head?" She shot him a quick look, her expression unreadable. "Tasari," she said crisply. "Tasari," Marcus repeated. "Cool, I'm Marcus. You know, in case you need to shout my name dramatically later when you heroically saved my life." Tasari did not dignify that with a response. She simply gestured sharply for him to keep moving. Marcus couldn't tell if she was annoyed or if that was just her default setting. Either way, he decided it was probably best not to push his luck. As they moved, Marcus's mind buzzed with questions. Who exactly was attacking the ship? Why was Tasari here? And why had they locked him in a room with her? Was this some bizarre form of intergalactic matchmaking gone horribly wrong? Before he could spiral any further, they came to a sharp turn in the hallway and straight into a patrol of spider-like drones. They hovered in the air, their gleaming black bodies bristling with weapons, red optics flaring to life as they registered movement. "Oh no," Marcus whispered, backing up instinctively. "I'm allergic to lasers." Tasari didn't hesitate. She lunged forward with an almost casual violence, producing a gleaming blade from somewhere on her armored suit. In two swift, fluid motions, she sliced through the nearest drone, sparks and bits of metal spraying the air like confetti at the universe's worst birthday party. The second drone opened fire, and Marcus yelped, throwing himself against the wall, just as a bolt of searing energy sizzled past his ear. "Maybe next time we could try diplomacy," he suggested weakly, even as Tasari dispatched the second drone with a brutal efficiency that would have impressed a chainsaw. The hallway was eerily silent again, save for the dying whir of broken machinery. Marcus slowly peeled himself off the wall, dusted off his now singed sleeves, and gave Tasari a thumbs up. "Well," he said, "I'm glad one of us knows what they're doing." Tasari simply resumed walking, her blade disappearing back into her armor as if it had never been there. Marcus hurried after her, still trying to process how quickly things had escalated from awkward roommate situation to full-on space combat. As they moved deeper into the ship, the architecture began to change. The sterile, functional corridors gave way to more heavily fortified sections. Bulkhead doors sealed tight, defensive turrets sprouting from the ceilings like menacing flowers. Whatever lay beyond these walls, it was clear the ship's designers hadn't wanted anyone, or anything, getting through. Marcus was about to comment on the change when Tasari stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. He froze, following her gaze to a panel embedded in the wall. A holographic interface flickered to life, displaying a rapidly scrolling stream of alien text Marcus couldn't begin to understand. "They are overriding the central systems," Tasari said, her voice low and grim. "If they gain full control, we will be trapped." "Trapped?" Marcus repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "As in, trapped? Trapped? Like, no more witty banter? Trapped?" She glanced at him, her lips twitching in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Precisely," Marcus sighed dramatically. "Well, there goes my plan to retire peacefully as a professional snack critic." Ignoring him, Tasari set to work at the control panel, her fingers flying over the alien symbols with practiced ease. Marcus peered over her shoulder, pretending he understood any of it. "Need me to hold a flashlight or something?" he offered. "No," she said without looking up. "Just be quiet." Marcus nodded solemnly. Silent as a grave for a man who tried to be helpful and was cruelly ignored by his blue-skinned friend. Tasari's ear twitched again, and Marcus was pretty sure that was her version of an eye roll. Progress, he thought. Suddenly, the floor beneath them gave a violent lurch. Alarms blared overhead, their shrill wails piercing the already fraying edges of Marcus's sanity. "They have breached the reactor chamber," Tasari said grimly. "If they destabilize it, the entire ship will be destroyed." Marcus swallowed hard. "And I'm guessing you left your emergency reactor stabilizing kit in your other pants?" Tasari turned from the console, her eyes blazing with intensity. "We must reach the core before they do." "Right," Marcus said, forcing a grin. "Save the reactor. Easy. I saw it in a movie once. Spoiler alert, the guy dies." With no more time for jokes or fear, He followed Tasari as she sprinted down the corridor. The ship's systems were failing rapidly now, bulkhead doors slamming shut behind them, lights flickering and dying. Somewhere in the distance, an explosion rocked the structure, sending a shock wave through the floor that nearly knocked Marcus off his feet. He skidded around a corner to find Tasari already engaged with another squad of drones, these larger and more heavily armed than the last. They moved in eerie synchronization, weaving through the air like a school of mechanical piranhas. Marcus ducked behind a support pillar as a volley of plasma bolts scorched the air above him. He fumbled at his belt, desperately searching for something, anything that could be used as a weapon. All he found was a half-melted multi-tool, 3 lint-covered mints, and a heroic level of misplaced confidence. Peeking out from cover, he saw Tasari in action once more, her blade carving arcs of brilliant blue light as she dismantled their attackers with ruthless precision. She was a force of nature, swift and deadly, every move calculated and flawless. And then suddenly, one of the drones peeled away from the fight, its optics locking onto Marcus. "Oh, no you don't," he muttered, ducking back. Thinking fast, or at least fast enough for someone about to be vaporized, he lobbed a mint at the drone's optical sensor. Miraculously, the sticky candy hit its mark, blinding the drone temporarily. It wobbled in the air, confused, and slammed into the wall with a satisfying crunch. Marcus stared in amazement. I blinded a killer drone with a mint. I am a space hero." Tasari dispatched the last drone and turned to him, a bemused expression flickering across her usually stoic face. "Perhaps you are not entirely useless?" Marcus beamed, high praise coming from someone who could kill me with a sneeze. Before Tasari could respond, another tremor shook the hallway, more violent than the last. The lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness. Marcus felt Tasari's hand close firmly around his wrist. "Come," she said, "we are out of time." And with that, she pulled him forward, deeper into the failing heart of the ship, toward a fate that was growing more uncertain by the second. Marcus stumbled blindly through the pitch-black hallway. The only things anchoring him to reality were the solid tug of Tasari's hand around his wrist and the low, ominous hum vibrating through the ship's dying systems. His shoes slipped on the tilted floor as the vessel groaned in protest. Somewhere overhead, something heavy crashed and sparked, showering faint blue embers down like dying stars. "I assume this wasn't part of the tour package?" Marcus called out, trying to mask his fear with humor, his voice bouncing awkwardly off the walls. "No," Tasari replied without missing a beat, "but if you survive, you may leave a review. 5 stars if we don't explode. 4 if I end up slightly singed," he muttered, ducking instinctively as another beam overhead creaked dangerously. Tasari led them down a series of twisting service tunnels, moving with the kind of certainty that suggested she knew the ship's layout by heart, or was at least very good at pretending. The deeper they went, the hotter it grew. Sweat trickled down Marcus's back, and the air took on a charged, metallic tang that made his tongue tingle unpleasantly. Finally, they burst into a cavernous chamber, bathed in the pulsing, sickly light of the failing reactor core. The enormous machine loomed in the center of the room, a monolithic cylinder of humming panels and whirling energy coils. Energy arcs snapped across its surface, and the floor plates around it buckled ominously, as if reality itself was protesting the ship's imminent demise. Clustered around the base of the reactor were the real enemy, not just drones, but tall insectoid figures, clad in reflective armor, that seemed to drink in the dim light. Their spindly hands worked feverishly at control panels, attempting to override the last safety protocols. Marcus's mouth went dry. "Well, that's new and horrifying, mostly horrifying." Sari pressed a small device into his hand. It looked like a glorified stapler, but she met his wide-eyed stare with the solemnity of a battlefield general. "Disruptor charge," she said. "Attach it to their command console. I will cover you." Marcus blinked. "Right. Infiltrate the heart of evil. Slap on the universe's deadliest paperweight. Easy." Before he could protest further, Tasari was already moving, leaping into the fray with the elegance of a dancer and the brutality of a battering ram. Her blade flashed like a comet, cutting a path through the alien ranks. Marcus clutched the disruptor to his chest and sprinted along the far wall, praying fervently to every deity he could think of, and possibly inventing a few new ones along the way. He ducked behind a steaming vent, narrowly avoiding a burst of plasma fire. His heart thundered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that screamed, "Bad idea, bad idea, bad idea." Somehow, by sheer luck and reckless momentum, he reached the main console. A mass of tangled wires and alien interfaces glowed with a malevolent light. Marcus hesitated, disruptor in hand. "Okay, Marcus," he whispered to himself. "Remember what Mom always said. Never touch strange electronics unless you want to end up a viral cautionary tale." He slapped the disruptor onto the console. Immediately, alarms shrieked to life, louder and angrier than anything before. The insectoid invaders turned as one, their mandibles clicking in fury. "Uh-oh," Marcus squeaked, diving behind a console as green bolts of energy scorched the air where he'd been standing. Across the room, Tessari fought like a living storm, but even she couldn't hold them all off forever. Marcus peeked over the edge of his cover, just in time to see her take a blow to the side, sending her sprawling. Without thinking, he surged forward. Some idiot part of his brain, probably the same part responsible for trying sushi from a gas station once, propelled him into the open. He grabbed a length of broken piping and swung it wildly, the world's least dignified rescue charge. The nearest alien turned to skewer him and promptly tripped over Marcus's outstretched foot. It went down with a thud that shook the floor. Marcus blinked. Did I just win a fight with slapstick? He didn't have time to savor the moment. Tessari recovered quickly, kicking the weapon from the fallen alien's grip and finishing it with a brutal efficiency that made Marcus's stomach flip-flop. "Come on," she barked, grabbing his arm again. They sprinted together as the disruptor charge completed its work. The alien systems collapsed in a cascade of sparks and smoke. The reactors hum, stabilizing into a steadier, less terrifying rhythm. Automated defense systems, long dormant, shuddered to life, targeting the remaining invaders and forcing them into a disorganized retreat. The ship wasn't saved yet, but at least it wasn't about to turn into a spectacular fireball. Progress. They stumbled into a safer hallway, panting and battered but alive. Marcus leaned against the wall, grinning like a man who had been on fire, extinguished himself by jumping into a swimming pool full of thumbtacks, and was weirdly proud of it. "So," he panted, "on a scale of I totally messed up to I am now a galactic legend, where do you think I land?" Tessari looked at him for a long moment, then, shockingly, laughed. It was a short, dry sound, but unmistakably a laugh. "You are infuriating," she said, "and foolish, and lucky." "Yeah, I get that a lot," Marcus beamed. "But you're smiling, so I'm calling it a win." Tessari shook her head but didn't argue. The ship's internal systems flickered and buzzed as emergency protocols reasserted themselves. Bulkheads sealed, fires were suppressed, and, somewhere distant, sirens wound down into a tired, grudging silence. It was over. They had survived. They made their way back to the central deck, where a few surviving crew members and a handful of battered drones regrouped. Sari spoke rapidly with a grizzled officer who seemed to both respect and fear her, while Marcus mostly tried not to look like he was about to faint from exhaustion. As they prepared to disembark, the ship was stable but in no shape to continue its mission. Marcus lingered by a porthole, staring out into the endless stars. He felt different, not taller, sadly, or less prone to bad decisions, but stronger somehow, like he'd been tempered in the fires of chaos and come out a little more solid, a little more him. Tessari joined him at the window, her reflection shimmering faintly in the glass. "You did well, Marcus," she said quietly. "Without you, we would have failed." Marcus snorted. "Without me, you probably wouldn't have had to babysit a bumbling human in the first place." She smiled, an actual smile this time, warm and a little weary. "Perhaps, but I am glad you were here." Marcus felt a strange warmth unfurl in his chest. "Me too, Tessari. Me too." The transport vessel's engines rumbled to life, preparing to carry them back to safety. Marcus turned from the window and squared his shoulders. The universe was vast, dangerous, and ridiculously complicated. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face it, even if he still had no idea how to win a fight without tripping his enemies. As the ship lifted away from the battered cruiser, Marcus leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes and smiled. Adventure, he thought, wasn't so bad after all.